So guys been talking about varieties and that his program on farm, and then I do OVT, and it even starts before that. So a lot of times even before varieties get an OVT, we'll be looking at them in small plots when companies are looking at germplasm, what they want to advance. So we evaluate germplasm even before maybe it becomes an experimental in OVT. Even back to the point of regulated trials with traits that are still have to be, in essence, quarantined. So we see some of these varieties, we see pretty much through most of the system of their latter part of the system of development. So I want to talk a little bit about growth regulators here today. That's certainly, one of the most common questions I get from down here is, having trouble keeping cotton the size you would like it to be. And I look at this cotton right here, and I'm looking at these internodes, and they did a really good job here. I don't know what the weather was like, but these internodes you don't see any big long internodes where they've let this cotton get away from them. Is that cotton too big? I'd say not. Would you want it a little shorter if we got a hurricane in here? Maybe. But it's hard to put that many nodes on cotton, make that good a cotton crop, and keep it too short. So it looks like to me they've done a good job. There's research out. If you look at the research, in most cases, you don't start seeing a yield penalty until cotton gets over, say, 55 inches or something. So I don't think we need to be alarmed that the cotton sometimes gets a little taller than we might like it to be. There's good retention in the bottom of this crop. So one of the things that Mepiquat does is I always hear growers talking about, well, I'm going to put some Mepiquat on and I'm going to switch this plant into a reproductive mode. Okay, the plant started fruiting down here. Looks like on node 6, unless I missed one. It started fruiting on node 6. And once it starts fruiting, it's pretty rare that you might see a vegetative branch above that. But you can find one every once in a while. But basically, once it starts fruiting, it's in a fruiting mode. It's a matter of whether it keeps fruit or not. There's no growth regulator you can put on here when the cotton was this big that switches it to a fruiting mode. There's no such thing. It turns into a fruiting mode, it stays in a fruiting mode, and it's just a matter of whether it keeps that fruit or not. Okay, so one of the things I think is important to look for, and this would be for a grower outside this area too, is to count from the uppermost leaf, 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got another one here where I didn't pull the leaves off. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Look at that internode below there. And we say for most the state, if that internode, that's an uppermost fully expanded internode there. It's right below where you'd pull a petiole sample, right here. That would be your petiole sample. If that's bigger than 2.5 inches, then you need to maybe think about slowing it down. And that's a good indicator of the horsepower of this plant at the time. Now, for you guys down here that feel like maybe you need a little more control, is there something magic about 2.5 inches? No. When we first started developing this program, I was in Alabama, and we started growing cotton down around Mobile. And it's a lot like this area. Soils that hold more water. They got about 60 inches of rain. They had to worry about hurricanes. And we felt like we needed something to help them get on the cotton sooner, because Mepiquat will not shrink cotton. So what you're doing is affecting future growth. So if the cotton's already too big, there's nothing you can do about it. You're trying to guide it until bow load takes over. Okay? So that's when you start talking about, like guys talking about it, say, maybe for y'all, maybe even start the 8th node on some of your stronger ground, but somewhere 8 to 10 nodes, start getting some picks on the cotton. And if you got real strong ground, you may want to change that to 2 1/4 or even 2 inches as your trigger of whether to use Mepiquat. Okay. Now, another thing I like to look at when I go in a field, and I don't know how to teach somebody this, but if you look at the top of this plant, you got a leaf about the size of a quarter, and look how big that square is. That square is huge. Okay? How big would that square be if this plant didn't have a boll load and it was rapidly growing? It'd be almost hard to see. Certainly y'all wouldn't be able to see it all around like I'm showing it right here. In fact, I pulled the smallest square I could find off, and if that cotton was rapidly growing, it'd be even smaller than that top square associated with that uppermost main stem leaf. Here's another one I pulled off the top of a plant. See how big that is? And if you watch that from bloom in your crop and just keep watching that terminal square size, you'll get a feel for how much horsepower your plant has, how fast it's growing. Another way to determine horsepower, it's a quick way, is to look for it's called nodes above white bloom. So we're going to look for a white bloom in the first position. Well, we got a lot of white blooms here, don't we? Well, that one is not on a first position. That one's on a vegetative branch. This one is on a second position. Right here's the first position's missing. I see a big scar here. Okay. This one right here is on a second position. This one made an auxiliary bud. So the nodes above here, once it gets below 5, above this first position white bloom, you're basically at cutout. And if you've got a lot of nodes below there, you're probably not going to put much cotton on. Now sometimes some of y'all that are on some of this drier land over here, coming in here, we saw a lot of shorter cotton. You may get into where the nodes above white bloom is 5, but there's not much boll load, and you get rain, and you may say in a suspended cutout, and it may still keep making cotton. But for the most part, once you get that nodes above white bloom of around 4, you don't need any picks. You've got boll load. That nodes above white bloom reaches even 5. You don't need, in general, you don't need picks. Okay. So those are a couple tools I think to help you decide whether you need, and I use picks and Mepiquat, sort of. They mean the same thing to me. So because picks was the first brand of Mepiquat we had. So the next thing I want to talk about is just to mention a little bit for y'all is defoliation. So we're going to have a crop like this. We can use nodes above cracked boll, which is very similar to nodes above white bloom. You're just counting the nodes above. The only thing is, in nodes above white bloom, you count to the top of the plant. Nodes above cracked boll, you find if that was a first position cracked boll, you count to the highest boll on the plant you can harvest. So if this is the highest boll I can harvest, and this one's just cracked open where I can see some white, it'd be 1, 2. Once that gets to about 3 or 4 on a crop like this, you should be ready to defoliate. Now, unfortunately, what some of y'all are going to have is a bottom crop. You got dry, you get some regrowth, you're going to make a top crop, and so nodes above white bloom, percent open, all those things don't work as well because you've got a young crop and an old crop. And all this is based on relative difference of age of these fruit. All this stuff about nodes above cracked boll or percent open. So I think this year for a lot of y'all that are trying to make a top crop, you need to be cutting bolls in that top crop. And don't worry so much about nodes above a cracked boll or percent open. You're going to really need to evaluate those top bolls and look for mature seed in those bolls if you're going to count on that top crop. Okay, is there any questions or comments before you walk down and look at the varieties? I appreciate y'all coming.